Wow. Wow. That's a great question. Wow, you got me on that one. I rarely receive a question that that's a great question, and I'm not sure I can answer it. I was really not looking forward to this day, but you guys have been really lovely, and this has been a wonderful interview. So thank you.
Where we're going, we don't need roads.
Good afternoon, sir. How are you doing today?
Thank you. I'm well. Thank you for having me.
Of course, I'm going to jump into this because I got 1,000 questions for you. I'm going to start out by saying that, honestly, and I mean this is a huge compliment, this movie reminds me of those great 90s action thrillers that I fell in love with as a kid, and honestly, that made me fall in love with movies. So I want you to take me back to the days before you were a director, when you were just a movie fan who would pop into VHS and fall in love with movies. What's the most important lesson you learned from watching movies, loving movies, and just being a movie fan that then taught you how to put things together later in life?
That's a great question, and I'm not sure I can answer it, but I do know that I always had a love for film. It was something that, whether I was in a good mood or a bad mood, it was my escape mechanism. And I think at the end of the day, whether I'm conscious of it or not, so many of the wonderful films we grew up with, they influence us, and we know also when things aren't as taut as they should be, or we can, as a viewer, I think we have a natural sense of what works and what doesn't. And as a director, I basically function from the same place. What would I like to see, or what would I enjoy? And you know it when it's not working. You can feel it, and that's pretty much the viewer.
You can be a movie fan without being a director, but can you be a director without being a movie fan?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think you have to love it. Anytime, by the way, it's such a brutal business. Anytime I speak with young folks trying to break in, the one thing I say is, you have to love this. You have to be incredibly passionate, because all the abuse and neglect and all the no's you're going to hear along your journey, the only thing that will keep you there is if there's a real passion for it.
That perfectly leads into my next question, because so much of this movie is about a man being forced to make some very tough decisions. What is the toughest decision you've ever had to make as a filmmaker?
Wow. That's a great question. Wow, you got me on that one. I rarely receive a question that, listen, I think at the end of the day, disappointment, and not your own, but maybe seeing someone else's disappointment. You always want to deliver, and you always want to give people something, maybe not what they expect, but at least they will enjoy. And I've been pretty lucky, but I've also, I've also made mistakes, and when it's not working, or when something is off, and that's a difficult emotion to kind of deal with. I guess failure, for that, for the sake of this conversation, is a horrible thing to experience. But one thing American culture, I think, does right is there is no failure. Everything is there's a possibility to learn from any mistake you make. And I've encountered a lot of people that aren't from the US that would rather not even attempt something out of fear of failure. So
speaking of something you didn't fail at, was a movie that you made a couple of years ago that I actually covered at the Toronto International Film Festival, which is when you got to work with Metallica. It's a great film. I love that film, which means I now have to ask the question, what is the biggest difference between working with certified rock stars and working with one of the greatest actors of all time, Mr. Liam Neeson? Are there any surprising similarities between the two?
I got to say that, the band is incredibly humble, considering all their massive success. And it must be a very difficult thing to step out onto a stage, have 100,000 people completely, in awe and in love, and staying grounded and staying humble. And Liam, with all his success, and he is Liam Neeson, is still a very grounded, passionate, someone who cares about the film and cares about what he's doing. And so in that regard, there was definitely a similarity. The big difference is, though, on the Liam Neeson film, I didn't lose half of my hearing. So working with Metallica, you tend to lose some of your senses, get dulled after a while.
Which just means that you're at a good concert. I mean,
That's right.
you're a little disappointed if you don't after a Metallica show.
That's right.
Speaking of Liam Neeson, I think there's been a lot of talk about sort of that transition he's made in his career from drama to action, and people still trying to figure out how is he so good in this action genre. I remember when Taken came out, all of us looking around going like, I'm sorry, where the hell did this come from? And I think it's because few action stars have the background in drama that he has. There aren't a lot of guys in this genre who can say that they starred in Schindler's List. So how much do you think his long history of dramatic work is what makes him a better action hero than most?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, what most action heroes get wrong is I think the way to relate to them best is vulnerability. I mean, everyone is so tough and so chiseled nowadays, and it's almost, it's like the Instagram presentation of what a tough guy is, as opposed to the reality. And I think even the toughest of guys are vulnerable and emotional. And Liam was certainly willing to go there and show that vulnerability in this film. And I think beyond the suspense and the action, which we tried to ensure was done the right way, what really, really surprised me was how engaging his interactions were with the children and the whole dysfunctional family of it all, and his willingness to show that vulnerability. And that, for me, is what really separates him, is this ability to present humanity in a plausible way in the most insane circumstances.
And he still allows, I mean, so many action stars today forget that, like, John McClane and Indiana Jones and all of our favorite action heroes, Lethal Weapon, like, they got their asses kicked. Like
That's
that,
right.
like there's not enough action stars that allow themselves to have their asses kicked today. And Liam Neeson, luckily, is one of the great ones who's humble enough to allow his ass to be kicked, which sounds like it's a weird sentence to say, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and he manages to kick back at the
yes,
end. Yes,
exactly.
So, but very true. I mean, it's very true that unfortunately we've seemed to have gotten confused as to a lot of things nowadays. So yeah. I agree.
I want to transition because I would love to talk about your work on Stranger Things. You were behind the camera for a couple of truly amazing episodes. Millie Bobby Brown said recently that she's kind of ready to move on, which I get. She's played 11 since she was 12 years old. Like, she wants to see what else is out there in her career and her life. I'm sort of curious what your experience was working with her. And did you get any sense at that time that the cast is sort of happy to have the end game in sight, that they're ready for that next step in their careers?
Well, it's a very big, it's very different between what I was doing and what they were doing, right? I was invited to come in to partake in a cultural phenomenon, right? They are the cultural phenomena. So, but one of the most appealing attributes to what the Duffer Brothers are doing or have done, beyond the fact that it's just fun storytelling and it's just a blast to watch the show. The cast that they chose, those kids, when I went in, were already world renowned. I mean, they could get off of an airplane anywhere in the world and there would be a mob waiting for them. And even with that success, and even with all the accolades that they've received, I met humble kids that were down to earth and they really wanted to do a good job. I mean, very similar to the cast I worked with in Retribution in that regard. Everybody was there, and there was no attitude, there was no ego, there was no weirdness. It was literally like, what can I do to make this better? I would work with any of those people. I'm writing something for Joe Keery. He doesn't even know about it, but I'm writing something for him right now. I am absolutely just blown away by how human those people were, regardless of that massive success that can quite often distort someone's personality in a big way. And that wasn't the case with them.
I look at what these kids experience and I just think, man, I would be such an asshole if I went through like that. It's amazing.
100%. I mean, I even today, I'm twice as old as those kids, if not more, man. And I still have trouble, with my own BS. So it's really great to see. And Millie, she's she's crazy talented. It's really disturbing, as are all the kids in that show.
Hey man, I seriously have really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for having just a real. Sometimes these junket interviews can just sort of feel like just borderline commercial conversation, but this felt like two movie fans talking to each other. So I appreciate you, man.
No, thank you, and I have to say the same thing. I was really not looking forward to this day, but you guys have been really lovely, and this has been a wonderful interview. So thank you,
dude. That's awesome. I appreciate your time, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, bye, guys.
Where we're going, we don't need roads.